Hello. Hi everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening. Based on the place you are joining in. Welcome to the monthly meetup of the Azure DevOps Forum Sri Lanka. This month we are going to talk a little bit about Azure Confidential Computing. My name is Malin De Silva. I am a Microsoft MVP for Azure and also working as a senior consultant at Capgemini Netherlands. What are we going to talk about today? The agenda is like this. We will speak a little about the need for confidential computing and why it is a big issue, and what is the confidential computing and what are the options that is available in Azure, and some VMs and ledger options that we can consume within Azure itself. Right. Now, data is the new currency, and if you look at data, there are different phases of data management that is happening related to different stages within an organization. You might be part of a small organization that just stores simple records for a system, and might be enterprise where much complex calculations and insights analytics needed within the data. And then within the data there can be several copies of the data, not just being single source of information. So there can be validations when data coming in. For example, some systems might require some different validations, whereas the others might require different validations. And then one thing very important is privacy. If you are into some sensitive information or you're in financial services sector, you might need to consider about the privacy aspect of the data as well. And then the analytics, of course. The world is moving more towards the data driven decision making, so you need to have these AI ML models being built around it so you can perform better analytics on it. And then certain countries and regions or the industries have different regulations and compliance requirements. So if you are going to cater with it, there are certain policies that you need to have in there. Lastly but not least, we have untrusted collaborations. You might be exposing data to another organization about some entity or some analytics information. So in such situations, data needs certain probably if it is related to personal data, there might be it's for anonymization, or there can be situations where even the personal information is available but based on the user who authorized it within a single scope. Now if you subscribe to a Facebook application and different situations, you are being asked what are the information is shared within the other people who are going to use the application. So in such situations, these collaborations are going to be they need to be very well managed, but end of the day, once the data leaves that box, it's just gone. So as an application, you need to ensure the correct data within the correct permissions are going to go in. So with all these situations happening around you, there is a need for data protection. Now data protection can happen at different stages. Firstly, data at rest. Now, what does it mean? At the storage, data is encrypted. So, unless you have the connection string or some other privileged mechanisms for connecting, including something like private link in Azure or something like that, you are not able to access the data. So, the data is at rest is very much secured. If someone hacks into the Azure data centers and see the file structures, they are very well encrypted and cannot be decrypted with simple phrases. So it's almost unbreakable. So data at rest is currently in a good standard as in to the compliance requirements. And then the data in transit. Now we are not just using HTTP because we are using HTTPS, so the tunnels are secured. It uses TLS 1.2, so the transport layer security is there. So the data in transit, if it is coming from a server, from a database to another server or to a person who is accessing it through a web browser or a computer. That's almost protected. So back in the days you could see the data in plain text, but nowadays when the data leaves your browser it goes encrypted, so no one in the middle can attack and find the meaning of the data, almost nothing. But there is another scenario that's been very much highlighted. Usually this hasn't been very much focused because they don't expose it to very public, which is data in use. Now what is data in use means? Imagine a situation you are going to perform some sort of calculation based on data. For example, you need to make a report based on the data available in the database. So the data at rest, the application connects to the data at rest using the connection string through the HTTPS, which happens to get the data in transit. But while the data is in use in a normal backend processor, that's very much accessible. Now it doesn't mean you can see data in the front, but if you monitor the DLL, there are ways it can be accessed. That's not very common, but still there's a probability. So the protection at that level is not so secure in such situations. So that is where this data in use come in. It doesn't mean that everyone is able to access the data at that level, but it's a very limited set of possibilities. But if that happens, that's very much vulnerable, because when you are, for example, creating a report and so on, you are taking a huge set of data. So it can be data of multiple users, unlike when you are transit, it will be like a single user. So the damage could be very high, even though it's unlikely. So that's why the data in use has become a very focus in security. Now, who can access this? It can be insiders within the organization, privileged admins who have access to the data servers. There are server administrators, so they might have access to it. And then there can be hackers who are exploiting bugs in the hypervisor or the operating system. Now, if you are using a Linux VM or Windows VM, and if there are certain vulnerabilities which we find very oftenly, and Windows is usually very much focused on putting pretty much fast, frequent updates to these attack vectors. So they are minimize the damage, but there is still a possibility of being exposed there. And then there can be third parties who can access this data without consent. It's a very rare occasion, but there can be situations like that. Now this is where the confidential computing comes in. So what is confidential computing? Confidential computing has been a recent evolvement, but it has been in the research, and the need has been there for over a few years. So what it happens is the protection of data in use by performing computation in a hardware trusted execution environment. This trusted execution environment is the basis of facilitating the confidential computing, and then it provides verifiable assurance for data integrity, code integrity, and the data confidentiality. Now, if we look at the diagram in the right side, what you see is we have this hypervisor, and then what happens is we have a host. Let's think about it as a Windows server, and it has a CPU and it has hypervisor, and the hypervisor has a operating system. Let's think about Windows again. Now this Windows environment is using CPU from the host, so that information is actually, that CPU sector is always exposed. Now what the trusted execution environment does is it creates a confidential area that shares part of the CPU and the disk volume and make sure that's not accessible for anyone outside. So your code runs and interacts with the data within that sort of a boundary that no one else is able to access. So if you look at these two boxes in beside, what happens is your code and the data are executing in separate containers. This image is related to AKS, confidential computing node, but you can think about it's similar in a normal hypervisor environment as well in this case, in logic. So the code and data executes in a separate secure environment that does not allow the hypervisor or the host OS to access it. So even if admin is logged into the computer, he cannot access this information because it is protected by trusted, and it creates a trusted execution environment. So there can be multiple applications that both, in this case you can see two applications, and both two applications are sharing different trusted execution environments. So it does not allow anyone to access each other's data, and it's very secure there. Right. Now, what are the confidential computing options on Azure? Now, some of these these have been a little bit time here, so you might see some of these production available right now. So if you look at the service options, we have the bottom, we have the infrastructure as service options, which are virtual machines that are generally available. The AMD, Intel and Nvidia, all the hardware providers are providing these virtual machines that has these enclaves, it is as said. So when you are creating a VM, you have the option of creating it. I will show it in the demonstrations as you come. And then for the AK containers, the Azure Kubernetes service also has certain container options. App Enclave, Intel SGX, that's a different technology. And then there are confidential VM worker nodes available for AKS, like generally available. And then there are Azure Container Instance option, which also have container options there. And in terms of the services, there are other services that are available. For example, SQL infrastructure as service on confidential VMs, and Azure Virtual Directories on confidential VMs, and confidential ledger, one of the most famous right now, is also available. So now I will show a demonstration on how to create a confidential VM within Azure portal. Now it's getting started is very easy. Now I'm in the Azure portal here. I hope you can see it. And in the virtual machine section, I will go to create a virtual machine. Right. So the basics are as it is: the subscription resource groups, and you give a name if you as needed, and then we have to select. We can select a trusted security launch virtual machines or confidential virtual machines. So what happens is these are two different. Ideally, we start with standard one, which has all the VMs there, and then we have the trusted launch virtual machines. They are like not allowing they are just ensuring the secure boot, and virtual trusted platforms are available, which means when you are booting the machine, they are not allowing any other unnecessary processes to start compared to confidential VM. So that's an option available. If not, you have the confidential virtual machines option as it is. Now once I select it, actually it has here, you can select everything, and then what you have here is the image. You can go to images and select the image, Ideally it will be Windows or something like that. I can select something like Windows Server. See, now that compatibility is here, because ideally in Windows 10 you don't need this. These are available for the server features. You see this. And then the sizes are available here, so not every size is available for the confidential VMs. So you can see what are available. Also you can go to see all the sizes, and here you can see different series that has it, and you can add a filter and select type and select confidential compute. Click OK. So here we can see we have the DC series, the confidential compute tab, and the EC series. So DC series is mainly for the confidentiality and integrity of code and data for general purpose workloads, and the EC series is for more about the memory intensive workloads. So you can see based on the region they might differ in the cost, but you can see a huge set of information on what are they available. And then you see the types that are incompatible with confidential virtual machines, right? So you can select one of these. For example, I select this, and then it's simple as the normal information that you need to provide. So you can RDP it, there's no issue. The enclave creation will happen later. So that is the location where you are going to find all the confidential VM options if you want to see. Right. Going back to the slide deck. Now it's a common thing that you are going to hear about the enclaves. So what is an enclave? So an enclave is a protected memory region. Sorry, is a protected memory region that provides the confidentiality for the data and code execution. So it is one of the trusted execution environment, and different manufacturers have different options there. And one of the Intel's one is Intel SGX, the Intel software guarded extensions, the option that is available. Now you can see how you going to migrate them into the confidential computing nodes. There are different options available. For example, you can onboard the legacy apps and onboard the new apps as well, depending on your requirement. Now this diagram shows difference between the AMD and Intel on how each of the execution environment works. So AMD has a different way of doing it, and Intel has a different way of doing it. So for example, if you look at it in an AMD virtual machine, the encrypted region is there and the attestation and execution happens inside, whereas in Intel it creates a enclave and then do the attestation and call the trusted environment, execute and return the business logic. So that's how it's happening. So the main thing is in AMD the data is loaded inside the enclave itself, inside the TDE itself, whereas Intel the data is loaded very lately. So the moving to the next one is the confidential ledger. Now what happens is these ledgers are becoming more attractive and are gaining quite a lot of attention. So there are situations where you need to have sort of a ledger platform where you will be connecting with multiple other parties. For example, you might be sharing data with another organization or something like that. So in such situations, the ledger technologies are becoming very famous. And one of the key reasons to use a ledger is to ensure that the tampering is not happening. For example, when you look at a SQL database or something like that, someone can go and easily change values if have access. But what this does is it enables tamper protection, so it cannot be easily protected by cannot be easily tampered. Now this is available for use. Let me show you. So I go to the Azure portal and select here. Confidential ledger. It is publicly available. So it's very easy to create. You give a name and region and select ledger type. Yeah. So you can select the security here based on how you need to do the access, and you can simply create. So what happens is it's exposed via REST APIs, so it's very useful, and the authentication allows the certification based authentication as well as AD based authentications, and the backend is in a blob storage that is secure and with your storage account, so it can be accessed like that. So that is it about the confidential computing. It's a very new topic, and the options are still new. So if you have any questions, feel free to send them over. Thank you.